All right, this is Adam House, undergraduate college student, currently a senior who has been on a pre-law track with political science and sociology and history. I have a double minor, so I'm currently taking an upper level course in history, the history department, and the course is called Resisting Fascism in Global History. This is week 7 of my undergraduate course diary. Again, this is not really for public consumption, although I am making my course diary public in case other people do want to watch it and maybe get something out of it. But this is really not this is really not geared in such a way or formatted in such a way as to be for public consumption. It's really just about me reflecting on my week's material. Again, this class meets once a week for 3 hours each week. It is very reading intensive. I have several books that I'm reading for this class, as well as online material and films and documentaries um, and articles, journal articles, and so on and so forth. So, again, this is not me reteaching my class. This is about me reflecting on the week's material, kind of organizing my own thoughts for my own benefit. So I'm not going to get my feelings hurt if you don't watch my videos, but if you do watch them, I hope maybe you will get something out of them for the investment of your time. All right, so week 7. This week we had touched on a little bit about fascism in Europe just before and during World War II, and what was going on in various fascist movements across Europe, as well as the anti-fascist movements across Europe during World War II. You have things going on like the original fascism is rising in Italy with Mussolini and his black shirts, and by the time World War II rolls around, Mussolini has consolidated his power, and Il Duce is very much in charge in Italy. Hitler has been in power in Europe for several years as the Führer, or the leader, who also had consolidated his power and was kind of at the height of his power in the Third Reich, the German Third Reich, the Nazi regime. Francisco Franco is he is the leader in Spain, and again, some people don't consider Francisco Franco quite as radical as Mussolini or Hitler, either one. But it is still very much a right-wing, authoritarian, violent regime, and there are resistors both inside Spain as well as resistors from around the world that come and form international brigades to help fight against the Franco regime leading up to World War II. Now, during World War II, the Spanish Civil War had basically wound down, and now it's really about Germany's Nazi regime and Italy and those across Europe who were supporting those fascist regimes. In France, France was one of the early countries to be invaded by Germany and taken over. France quickly surrendered, and a new general, actually a colonel that had just been promoted to general, by the name of Francis de Gaulle, had fled when the Germans took over France. De Gaulle fled to Great Britain, and from outside of France, he tried to lead basically in a French insurgency to help direct a French insurgency against the Nazi occupation. So there is a French resistance We're going to be talking about the French Resistance. We actually have a couple of books on the French Resistance, so we're going to be talking about that a little bit here and there through the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks in our course material. So this week was our first introduction to the French Resistance and what was going on there. One of the names that came up with the French Resistance was Camus, Albert Camus. Camus is known as a writer in his own right, but he had written for the Underground during World War II. He had written some resistance material. We know that he wrote some of it, but we also know that some of it's questionable as to the author, and so some of the writings attributed to Camus as a resistance writer, a French resistance writer during the Nazi occupation, is it's not known for an absolute fact that he was the author, but most people do attribute a lot of these writings to him because he did a lot of writings in this vein, and a lot of the writings that have been attributed to him are because the writing style very much matches those things that we do know for sure that came from Camus. So, all right, so I wanted to touch on some of these writings. And before I get into these, I want to set the stage a little bit about the situation. The French people were somewhat divided when the Germans took over. There were definitely those among the French who were very much against the Nazi invasion. They were resistors from the beginning. They were opponents from the beginning. Some of those people died. Some of those people, as France was taken over, they bit their tongue and basically pretended to be apolitical or tried to stay out of any fighting or anything. Other people tried to flee to other countries. But there were also French people who were fascist. They considered themselves fascists, and they basically ended up supporting the Nazi regime. So France is somewhat divided. You've got a lot of different groups and factions, and a lot of different feelings and allegiances that are happening on the ground, as in every country that's going through this tumultuous time in world history and European history. And, one of the things that the French resistance was running into was that, not everybody was on their side. Not everybody supported the cause of resistance. And so this created, besides using the resistance to fight the Nazi occupation, this also caused much consternation, because the French resistance was constantly just trying to win over their own people, the French people, into the resistance, or at least to be supportive of the resistance, or at a bare minimum, to not be hostile or to in any way get in the way of the resistance. So they were always looking to try to bring more people to their side. Now, this highlights a major issue for when fascism is on the rise in any country. Not everybody is going to support the fascist movement as it comes to power. Not everybody is going to resist the fascist movement as it comes to power. And so there is this great divide between people. So now, consulting some of the readings, again, this is attributed to Camus, called Combat Underground number 55, written in March of 1944. And I'm just going to read a few lines. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to read you a few excerpts from it. They say, talking about the Germans, French resistance says, they are saying to Frenchmen, we are killing and destroying bandits who would kill you if we weren't there. You have nothing in common with them. So this tells us that the German propaganda was that, hey, what we're actually doing in France is good for you. We're trying to get rid of the undesirables. We're trying to get rid of the worst criminals and the bad people. And so the Nazis, like fascists often do, tried to justify their invasion, their occupation, and their hostile actions against the French people within France as if they were basically trying to clean the place up. That's their side of it, is that they're doing a public service. So this was the Nazi propaganda, and what I just read to you was part of the French pushback. The French resistance says, here is the truth. It is that the French have everything in common with those whom they are today being taught to fear and despise. So it kind of goes back to that old idea of the common people. You know, we tend to have much more in common with each other, even across international boundaries, than we do with the most powerful and wealthy people within our own country. You know, I have more in common with a average British citizen, or the average French citizen, or the average Italian citizen than I have in common with, say, Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Elon Musk or somebody like this. So, yeah, the wealthy and powerful within our society. All right, so another section of this writing by Camus says, these dead Frenchmen were people who might have said, this doesn't concern me. Now he's talking about some of the French who had been executed by their German occupiers. But the Germans decided that it did concern them, and on that day they demonstrated that it concerned all of us. Don't say this doesn't concern me. I'm at home with my family. I listen to the radio every night and I read my newspaper. Because they'll come after you on the pretext that somebody at the other end of France refused to go. They'll take your son, who also said it was no concern of his, and they'll mobilize your wife, who until now thought the whole business was for men only. In reality, it does concern you, and it concerns all of us, because all the French are today bound together so tightly by the enemy that one person's act inspires all the others, and one person's inattention or indifference can cost 10 others' lives. Don't say, I sympathize, that's quite enough, and the rest is no concern of mine, because you will be killed, deported, or tortured as a sympathizer just as easily as if you were a militant. Act. Your risk will be no greater, and you will at least share in the peace at heart that the best of us take with them into the prisons. In other words, this kind of goes back to that old Martin Niemöller poem, the German pastor who became an opponent of the Nazis in Germany during World War II. You know the old poem, you can look it up for yourself. You know, first they came for the socialists, or they came for the trade unionists. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. They came for the socialists. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist, and so on and so forth. And Niemöller eventually ends his poem by saying, and then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak out. So the idea is that your passivity and your indifference in the face of rising fascism is not going to save you. Appeasement is not going to save you. Neutrality is not going to save you. your acts of resistance are much more likely to be effective and to potentially save your life than if you just go along and appease and bow your head, kiss the ring, and bend the knee to the enemy, to the fascists. All right, so let's see what else. Yeah, there's only one France not to understand that you are connected to the people around you, whether you like it or not. You know, there's that other old cliche about people might say, "I'm not interested in politics. I don't have an interest in politics. I don't want to take an interest in politics. I'm apolitical." The thing is, it doesn't matter whether or not you have an interest in politics. Politics will take an interest in you. So to try to claim your indifference and to try to divide yourself and say that it doesn't concern you, that it's not part of you, that's really just kind of burying your head in the sand, and eventually it comes back to bite you. Eventually you will find out that it does in fact concern you, and the less people stand up, the quicker and easier the authoritarianism will eventually come for you. So let's see. Camus goes on to say, action in the cities to respond to the attacks in the countryside, action in the factories, action on the enemy's lines of communication, action against the malice. Every militiaman is a possible murderer. There is only one fight, and if you don't join it, your enemy will nevertheless supply you with daily proof that that fight is in fact yours. All right, so again, you really just can't separate yourself from the struggle in a country where fascism is on the rise. You're really just deluding yourself, fooling yourself. Yeah, so he goes on to talk about a specific incident in which a bunch of people, a bunch of French people, just random people, were pulled from the streets. And it says, for 3 hours, minute after minute, without let up, without pause, in a single French village, shots were fired one after another, and bodies fell writhing to the ground. Among those 86 innocents were men who thought that, having done nothing to oppose the German forces, nothing would be done to them. So again, it's the lesson of history. Your indifference will not save you. Your passivity will not save you. Your appeasement will not save you. Looking the other way will not save you. All right. So the other thing that I want to mention here, let's see. Yeah, so the other thing I want to mention here is going back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this video, with and speaking about it in the context of the French resistance during World War II. Not everybody, even the Frenchmen, are going to be on the same side. Just like, if fascism is rising in America, some people are going to support it, and other people are going to resist. And it is historically part of the dynamic that the two sides become more and more polarized. And that's part of what leads to the rise of authoritarianism. Also part of what leads to the rise of political violence. Part of what leads to the rise of a civil war. Is a sharply divided country where it's basically split down the middle, and half are on one side and half are on the other side, or maybe not half and half, but something to that effect, where there's substantive amount of people that are opposing and substantive amount of people that are supporting, and they just become more and more. They get further and further apart. They become more polarized. The more polarized they become, the easier it is for conflict to ensue. So, so one of the lessons that we can take from that is to understand that if and when we are in a position where we feel like fascism is rising in our country before our eyes, we have to come to terms with the fact that we're not only going to have to resist the fascists and their actions, but we're also going to have to engage in trying to win the public sentiment to our side. And as the polarized sides grow further and further apart, that may become more and more difficult. So one of the elements of this that I find interesting is let's go back to the story of when the high-ranking Nazi official, one of the officers, German officers who was responsible for the designing the final solution, the extermination of the Jews on an industrial scale in camps. Reinhard Heydrich, when he was, we talked about his assassination before. When Heydrich was assassinated, the German reprisal was swift and fierce and unforgiving. They razed entire villages and towns and burned them to the ground. The city of Lidice, in particular, was the one that we talked about, where all of the adults in the town were lined up and shot, executed, and a few of the kids made it out, placed into German foster homes, where they thought that those children could be adequately Nazified and turned into good little Nazis. But the overwhelming vast majority of those kids were marched into ovens and gassed and killed that way. So it basically, and then they wiped the whole town off the face of the map. They bombed it. They bombed it into non-existence. They turned a whole city into powder, and wiped it off the face of the earth. Now, one of the things I think was interesting about that was that the Germans actually recorded themselves doing this to the city of Lidice. They actually recorded footage of them executing these people, of them burning the city to the ground, of all the atrocities and violence that they were committing. They were proud of it, and they knew that they were going to put that footage out there and use it as propaganda, because in the mind of the Nazis, this was them showing the rest of the world, especially those peoples and those countries under whom, the people they were occupying at the time, that was under their thumb at the time. They wanted to show them, this is what's going to happen if you oppose us. If you try to assassinate one of our high-ranking officers or do something else like this against the Third Reich, this is what you're going to get too. And so it was meant as a deterrent. They actually recorded their war crimes so that they could use that video as propaganda for a deterrent to keep other people from trying something like the Czechs did in assassinating Reinhard Heydrich. The interesting thing about it is the Allies also got their hands on this same footage, but the Allies also used the footage and put it out there. But they put it out there, obviously, to say, hey, look, this is the evil of the Third Reich. This is the moral depravity, the inhumanity, the atrocities that are being committed in the name of Nazism, in the name of Hitler, in the name of this German Empire under the Third Reich. And look how bad this is. Look how disgusting this is. Look how utterly and purely evil this is. The same video footage is being put out by both sides, because both sides believe that the footage serves their propaganda, serves the interests of their own propaganda. And what that tells us is that the real divide was about the morality of the two sides. You know, one side is saying, look, this is morally repugnant and evil. And the other side is saying, look, we are powerful and this is what we're going to do to you if you oppose us. And the fact that both sides wanted that video footage out there to serve their own propaganda needs just goes to show the polarized morality of the two sides. Obviously the Nazis being the side that had dispensed with empathy, that had dispensed with humanity, that had dispensed with any ideas of life, liberty, and justice, and pursuit of happiness for all mankind, that any kind of egalitarian feeling or feeling of humane treatment, that people have inherent rights to things like liberty and due process, and to be treated with respect and dignity. The Nazis had slowly but surely taken step after step after step. It started with things like, calling the Jews bad names and telling racist jokes about the Jews, and then slowly they started to make laws that affected Jews, negatively impacted Jews more than they did other people, and eventually those evolved into laws that were just specifically against Jews and against their businesses, and enabled the population of Nazis to be able to loot the Jews, plunder the Jews, round up the Jews and put them in ovens, and not just Jews, but also disabled people and gay people and transgender people, and basically anybody who was not a good Aryan, white, Christian, conservative, nationalist, far right, Hitler loving German. If you didn't identify as a good Aryan under the Third Reich, then eventually you were a target of the Third Reich, because they had dehumanized everybody but the Aryan ideal of the Übermensch, the German Superman. And of course, then that means that the other side that used the Lidice propaganda, the Allies, America, Britain, France, the resistance, that side used the war crimes that were the footage of the German war crimes to show that this is in fact an evil empire that needs to be overthrown, that needs to be defeated. And it just goes to show the polar opposites of how morality, as the two factions had become more polarized and become more fierce enemies over time, their morality diverged and went two different directions. And so you've got basically good versus evil. You've got morality versus immorality. You've got humanity versus inhumanity. And this is what one of the cruelest and most grotesque things that fascism does, is that it slowly erodes morality. It slowly erodes ethics. It slowly erodes empathy. It slowly erodes our connection to our fellow human beings. And so when we see little steps towards authoritarianism in any society, when we see these little steps, step after step after step after step, maybe none of them by themselves, maybe no one step by itself seems like a huge step. but it's this small series, the series of small steps, the series of small steps that adds up over time. And eventually you go from a society where people are basically, at least somewhat theoretically, equal. And only a short few years later, you have some people, one demographic of people, who are literally marching another demographic of people into ovens and exterminating them as if they were rats or cockroaches. And that's where fascism takes us. So, let's resist fascism. Let's embrace our humanity. Let's embrace empathy. Let's embrace love. Let's embrace a brotherhood of mankind, of humankind, all the children of the world. As the old song says, red and yellow, black and white. All of us together in our common humanity need to understand that we are all part of the same whole. And to never let authoritarianism, fascism, these kinds of passions of racial purity and racial superiority and religious purity and religious superiority and these kinds of ethnic differences and cultural differences and lifestyle choices and differences, that we should not let these divide us from our own humanity. Because to reject another human being's humanity is to reject your own humanity. And that only leads to pain and suffering for us all. And none of us are immune to that. And the more it gets out of hand, the more it's left unchecked. That kind of inhumane authoritarianism, that kind of fascism will only continue to claim more victims. It'll speed up, it'll get more grotesque, more fierce, and it'll claim as many victims as it possibly can, unless and until resistors decide that even though we may stand against a rising tide and a formidable force, resistance is never futile. Resistance always matters. Resist fascism. Fuck Trump. Fuck ICE.